There is a mountain in the Judean desert, 14 kilometers east of Jerusalem, that has never been excavated. No archaeologist's grid, no trench, no published survey below the surface. It sits at 524 meters above sea level, the highest peak between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. And its rock face on the eastern side does not slope. It drops. Vertical limestone, pale and silent in the desert heat. In Arabic, this mountain is called Jabal Muntar, Mountain of the Watchman. A book excluded from most Bibles commands an archangel to come here, open the desert floor, and seal something inside. The official explanation says that is metaphor, but the text gives the place a name. That name is Dudael. And before we are done, you will understand why an entire generation descended into the earth. Kenyortusinai, and what the text says was already waiting for them when they did. Let's start with what we actually know. In the Judean desert, east of Jerusalem, between the ancient city and the lowest body of water on earth, there is a region that ancient religious tradition kept returning to for one specific reason. It was the site of a ritual so important it was performed once a year, on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, by the high priest himself. A goat was selected, sins were confessed over it. Then it was walked east, out of Jerusalem, through the desert, on a specific route, past 10 physical way stations that were constructed along the path. Not imagined, built. Stone booths, spaced through the wilderness, where men would wait and offer food and water to the one leading the goat. And those men, every year, refused to eat or drink. They were escorting something to a cliff, and at that cliff, the goat was pushed off. The Mishnah records this, the route, the booths, the thread, the push. The high priest in Jerusalem knew the moment the animal died because a scarlet thread was split in two. One piece tied to the rock at the cliff, one piece tied to the goat. When the animal hit the rocks below and did not move, a relay of men communicated the signal back, station by station, all the way to Jerusalem. The high priest exhaled. You do not build 10 relay stations for a pure metaphor. The name of the place the goat was sent to die? Azazel. And Azazel is not just a word in Leviticus. Azazel is a name, specifically the name of a fallen angel, one of the leaders of the Watchers, who, according to a text excluded from most Bibles, was bound in the desert before the flood, bound hand and foot, covered in rough and jagged rocks, sealed in darkness, his face turned away from light, at a place called Dudael. That text is the Book of Enoch, and this is where the story stops being comfortable. The Book of Enoch is not a fringe document. It is not a medieval invention. Fragments of it, written in Aramaic, were found in Cave 4 at Qumran in 1948 among the Dead Sea Scrolls. 11 fragments. Fragment designations: 4Q201 through 4Q206 and beyond, catalogued by the Israel Antiquities Authority. The leather is cream-colored, the ink blurred, the manuscript dated to the 2nd century BCE. More copies of this text were preserved at Qumran than almost any other non-canonical work recovered from those caves. Multiple independent scribal communities were copying it at the same time. That does not happen with a text that nobody believed. The earliest sections of the Book of Enoch, specifically the section called the Book of the Watchers, are estimated by most scholars to date to the 3rd or 4th century BCE. And the complete text survived in one place after the Western Church stopped copying it: the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, preserved in the ancient liturgical language called Ge'ez, where it has been treated as canonical scripture without interruption. James Bruce recovered it from Ethiopia in 1773. The West had lost it for over 1,000 years. Ethiopia never dropped it. Here is the other thing. The New Testament book of Jude, which is still in your Bible, directly quotes the Book of Enoch by name, verses 14 and 15. It attributes the prophecy to Enoch himself. And the text it quotes is sitting in those Dead Sea fragments, word for word. The book was removed from the Western canon at the Council of Laodicea in 363 AD. But the quote stayed in Jude. They removed the source and kept the citation. So when the Book of Enoch says something about a physical place, that is not a fringe claim. That is a claim made by a text preserved across 3 independent manuscript traditions, quoted in the New Testament, and found in the oldest surviving collection of Jewish religious manuscripts on earth. Now read what it actually says. Chapter 10. God gives an archangel 4 instructions. This is the chapter where the pre-flood judgment begins. The first order: go to Noah. And the exact command given to Noah is this: hide thyself. Not build a boat, not prepare. The first word is hide, conceal, separate yourself from the surface. The flood has not arrived yet. What has arrived is a world that has become impossible to survive on above ground. And the first divine response is concealment. That order lands in the second verse of the chapter. By the fourth verse, God is already giving a second command, this time to the archangel Raphael, and this one is operational. It reads like instructions given to someone who will physically execute a task. Bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into the darkness, and then make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael. Cast him therein, place upon him rough and jagged rocks, cover him with darkness, cover his face so he may not see light. Let him abide there forever. One chapter, two commands. Both happen at the same moment in the pre-flood narrative. One sends a righteous human into concealment. The other sends a fallen angel into the ground. Same text, same moment, same directional logic. Go under. The official interpretation says the first command means take refuge. The second command means cosmic justice. Both are symbolic, and that reading works until you count the details. A name, an opening, a specific desert, a method of binding, a type of rock, rough and jagged, specifically not smooth, not generic stone, but rough and jagged. A sensory condition, darkness. A body instruction, cover his face. A duration, forever. A judgment date, the great day of fire. That is not how symbolic texts give location data. Symbolic cosmic prisons do not usually specify the geology of the rocks used to cover the prisoner. Symbolic judgments do not usually name the specific type of stone and the covering angle. But here is what makes this harder to dismiss. The surface world that preceded this command was not symbolically violent. According to the Book of Enoch, chapters 7 and 8, the Nephilim, the hybrid offspring of the fallen watchers and human women, had consumed everything. The text says, directly, when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. They began to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish. That is an ecosystem description, not a moral metaphor. The prey categories are specific. The text is not saying people became spiritually corrupt. It is saying the dominant species on the surface had shifted, and it was eating everything below it on the food chain. Where do you go when something larger than you is using the surface as a hunting ground? Not to a city, not to a field. Every surface refuge becomes visible. The only concealment a ground-level predator cannot easily access is what lies below the ground. The Judean desert, the region between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, is not empty underneath. It never has been. The Judean wilderness is riddled with cave systems. The Dead Sea Scroll community at Qumran lived in that cave network. Byzantine monks, centuries later, moved into caves in those same cliff faces to seek isolation. Countless populations across the ancient world used those underground passages for refuge, for storage, for survival. The Judean desert has been a below-ground world as long as people have needed to disappear from the surface. The text says the earth cried out. Chapter 9 of the Book of Enoch describes it. The cries of mankind reached the gates of heaven. Not a spiritual lament, a physical cry. Something was wrong on the surface. And God's first response was not the flood. It was a command to conceal one man. Which raises the question the text never quite answers. What happened to everyone else between that command and the water? Something else was also going below ground. At the same time, in the same desert, bound. Now read the passage about what Enoch himself saw when he walked to these places. Chapters 17 through 22 of the Book of Enoch are not written in prophetic distance. They are written in first person. I went, I came to, I saw, he showed me. Enoch does not observe these things from a safe spiritual altitude. He moves through them. He names compass directions. He describes textures. He walks to a large and high mountain, hard rock, and 4 hollow places, deep, wide, very smooth. He looks down into them. He asks Raphael what they are. He is not asking because the vision is unclear. He is asking because he has never seen anything like this and cannot understand its scale. Then he goes somewhere worse. Chapter 21. A place with a cleft reaching into the abyss, full of great pillars of fire. And he says, "Neither its extent nor its size could I see." He could not determine where the edges were. A visionary symbol has edges. This did not. He was frightened, and Uriel, the angel with him, tells him plainly, "This is the prison of the angels, and here they will be held forever." The language is not doctrinal. It is the language of a man standing at the rim of something he cannot measure and cannot fully comprehend. That is how humans describe real things that exceed their experience. That is not how ancient writers describe symbolic concepts they have invented. Here is the question that has never been comfortably answered. Why does a symbolic vision include details the symbol does not need? Now, here is where R.H. Charles enters the story. Charles produced the definitive English critical edition of the Book of Enoch in 1906, and it is still the foundational scholarly translation. In his commentary on the binding passage, Charles identifies Dudale, the named desert of 1 Enoch 10, explicitly as the place of the scapegoat. He links it directly to the Judean desert location used in the Yom Kippur ritual. The Hebrew etymology of Dudale is cauldron of God. In some manuscript traditions, the name appears as Beth Hadudo, house of the cauldron. The Ethiopian Gaze manuscripts carry the name intact, without gloss, without softening, without the substitution of vague spiritual language for the specific geographic reference. But in traditions where the text was eventually filtered through Greek translation and later Christian interpretation, the location became less specific. The desert of Dudale became increasingly treated as a cosmic space, rather than a terrain feature. The name was retained in some texts, but its anchoring power weakened. The Ethiopian tradition did not do this. Because the Ethiopian tradition never removed the book from its canon, it had no reason to soften what the book said. The name stayed. The rock stayed. The command stayed physical. And then 2 Peter 2-4. A Jewish Christian writer, writing in Greek for a Greco-Roman audience, reaches for a word to describe where the imprisoned watchers were sent. The word he chooses is Tartaros, not Sheol, not a general underworld term. Tartaros, the Greek mythological location specifically below Hades, where the Titans were imprisoned. The deepest prison in the Greek cosmological map. Why would a writer steeped in Jewish tradition, writing about Jewish figures from a Jewish text, reach for a pagan Greek geographic term, unless he was looking for the closest available word for a physical place that had depth, direction, and permanence? The fact that writers from different cultural traditions kept independently reaching for physical, geographic, depth-specific language to describe the same location is not nothing. Now the ground itself, east of Jabal Muntar, between that cliff and the Dead Sea, the earth is failing. The Geological Survey of Israel has documented more than 6,000 sinkholes along the Dead Sea shores. They are in Israel, Jordan, and the West Bank. The Ein Gedi Resort, once a working tourist destination, is now permanently closed. The road to the shore is cracked open in circular collapses. Palm trees lie horizontal across broken asphalt. Infrastructure that was standing has been swallowed. These sinkholes form because the Dead Sea is receding. Freshwater percolates into underground layers, dissolves ancient salt deposits, creates voids at depths of 25 to 50 meters, and then the surface collapses into the void without warning. No surface signal. The opening happens below first. Make an opening in the desert. This is not proof. Say that clearly. Modern geology and ancient religious texts are not the same kind of claim, and they should not be collapsed into one argument. The sinkholes are caused by water chemistry and hydrology, not supernatural intervention, but the coincidence carries weight of a different kind. The specific desert region named in the ancient text as the site of an underground prison is the region where the modern Earth actively produces underground voids without warning. The ancient writer described the ground being opened. In this exact region, the ground keeps opening. One detail could be coincidence, but when you have a named location, a named entity, a specific type of rock, a command to seal the entrance, a ritual performed at the physical cliff above that location for centuries, an Arabic name that still means watchman, in a language spoken by people with no living memory of the tradition that named it, and a geological condition that mirrors the specific language of the text. The symbolic reading starts to carry more weight than it should have to. And here is the detail that nobody likes to say out loud. Jabal Muntar has never been excavated. This is confirmed. The archaeologist who has documented it notes plainly, the site has never been dug. No grid, no trench, no subsurface investigation of any kind has been published. A Byzantine monastery was built on its summit in 450 AD, which itself follows the ancient pattern of constructing Christian religious sites on locations that already carried deep religious gravity from earlier traditions. The monks knew what this place had been. And then the monastery fell, and nothing came after it. The mountain sits in the desert, accessible only by four-wheel drive, above the Dead Sea sinkhole field, beneath the Arabic name that means watchman, at the site identified by the greatest Enoch scholar of the 20th century as the most probable candidate for the desert of Dudael. And no one has looked below the surface. This does not mean something is there. The absence of excavation is not evidence of a discovery waiting to happen. That would be a different kind of claim, and the facts do not support it. But it means the most important physical question connected to this entire tradition remains open in the simplest and most literal way possible. The rocks have not been moved. The text says, "Cast him there. Place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and let him abide there forever." The rocks are still there. Think about what one chapter of the Book of Enoch actually contains. Chapter 10. God tells one man to hide himself below the surface. God tells an archangel to open the desert floor and seal a fallen angel inside. Both commands happen at the same moment. Both involve concealment below the surface of the world. And the world above is described in the chapters just before this as a place where the dominant creatures have turned against humanity and are devouring everything that moves on the surface. If the surface is a hunting ground, and God's first response is to command concealment, and the text describes the cries of an entire generation reaching heaven, what does the generation that could not reach an ark do? The text does not say they all died immediately. It says they cried out. Something occupied the gap between that cry and the water. The Judean desert is full of caves. The cliff systems between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea are among the most extensively cave-networked terrain in the ancient Near East. People have been going underground in this region for as long as survival has required it. The Dead Sea Scroll community lived in those networks. Hermits retreated into those cave faces for centuries. The geography makes below-ground refuge the most logical, physical option for anyone trying to disappear from the surface in this region. Now look at the Arabic name of the highest peak in that desert, Mountain of the Watchman. No one is certain when that name was attached to this peak. The Arabic-speaking populations who applied it did not have a living tradition connecting it to the Book of Enoch. They named a mountain. And the name they chose, in their own language, with their own logic, points back toward the same word the ancient text was built around. The official explanation for all of this is still available. The Book of Enoch is Second Temple apocalyptic literature. It uses symbolic cosmic geography to express theological truths about divine judgment and the punishment of evil. Dudael is a literary construct, not a location. The generation that hid is a rhetorical device, not a historical population. The binding of Azazel is a mythic parallel to the Yom Kippur ritual, which is itself symbolic. The Judean desert and the sinkhole field are geological phenomena unrelated to ancient texts. And Jabal Muntar is simply an unexcavated site in a region where hundreds of sites remain unexcavated for practical reasons. That explanation is clean, but the passage still gives a name. It still specifies rough and jagged rocks specifically. It still contains two parallel concealment commands in the same chapter at the same moment. It still uses first-person walking and looking and not being able to see the bottom. It still connects Azazel to Leviticus, to the Yom Kippur cliff, to the site identified by the leading scholar of this text as the most probable physical candidate. The New Testament still reaches for a Greek depth geography word to describe where these beings were sent. The Ethiopian tradition still carries the name without softening. And the ground east of the only mountain in the region, still called Watchman, still keeps opening beneath itself without warning. The text did not change. The interpretation did. The mountain is still there. It is still the highest point in the Judean desert. The cliff face on the eastern side still drops without warning into pale rock and silence. The Dead Sea is visible from the top, a dark stripe in a pale landscape, shrinking every year. Its shoreline pulling back and leaving behind fields of ground that open without warning. Somewhere below the salt and the silted layers, underground voids keep forming at depth. The surface above them looks solid until the moment it is not. And above all of it, 14 kilometers from Jerusalem, at the site where the ancient ritual pointed every year for centuries, at the cliff where the scarlet thread was tied to the rock, and the relay runners waited for the signal, the mountain sits unexcavated. The rocks are still covering whatever is below them. The Arabic name is still Watchman. The ancient text still says the opening was made and the ceiling was permanent. The generation hid. The surface was emptied. Something was bound underground. The text was removed from the canon. The ritual continued at the cliff for centuries. The monastery was built on top of the cliff. Then the monastery fell. And since then, silence. Wind moving through limestone. The Dead Sea pulling back. The ground opening below. No one has looked.